This is a recorded version of the presentation made to Student Services on October 2nd at the division meeting in fall of 2018, and it's about the new program review and the assessment process reflected in that program review. I want to keep it to under 15 minutes, so if you see any information on a slide and you want to take it down, I would hit pause. Okay, I'll be looking at 4 questions. What's different about assessment generally? What about this year? Any changes to data collection? And what about TrackDat? So what is different about SLO assessment? Broadly speaking, it's more intentional. We have been habitually collecting data with an idea that no outcome would be left collected, or each outcome was a basket that should have data in it. But instead, now we really are encouraging people to actually have questions rather than to expect that data to reveal a pattern, to have a question that you are trying to find out about to do with student learning and improving student learning. And that the process really is driven by a particular research question, something you'd like to find out. It's really about continuous improvement. The language of program review is also changed. First of all, the structure is roughly chronological. So instead of distinguishing between different measures of student success, now there's your description of program, and then there's results of the previous review, assessment, meaning current assessment, and planning, what you're going to do next. You've got some new language in there too. First of all, question 2 has a number of elements, but one of them asks you to discuss any curriculum changes since last program review, including SLO alignments. Now, for this question, you may remember that, and I'll probably mention it later, but we did do a mapping activity in March, I think, of 2018. And that is really about aligning your outcomes for your service with institutional outcomes. And then the other big change is in the section on assessment. The old language had a number of questions about SLO assessment. Reflect on recent results, reflect on the results of assessments, examine your program to general education alignment. What do you know about general education based on your own data? We've revised that. First of all, SLO assessment is now part of a number of factors in effect, evaluating your service. Notice it's E, so there's 4 other things to do with, I think, student usage and productivity and other factors. So student learning is one of them. And it simply asks you to reflect on the SLOs or SAO results for the program. Is there anything you want to change or improve? It's a good deal simplified. Also new is a documentation routine. So starting this fall, we're asking everyone to just jot down their assessment plan for the 18-19 year in the fall. So next year, 19-20. Very brief, very simple, but just something to keep track of, because it's very hard often to keep in mind, our plans from one semester to another as priorities arise and people pass laws and the students change. And then one day it's 2020 and you're writing program review and you say, oh my God, what were we going to work on? So it's important to have some documentation. So we thought something very simple, a quick plan. You have to submit your plan in fall, and you submit a check-in form, sort of status update form in the spring. In the even years, you summarize all this in program review, so it becomes the basis for program review. Here's an example of the kind of thing we mean, and this was something we actually filled in on Tuesday at the division meeting. I just asked for a volunteer, but this is just the kind of thing you might do. So let's say you're counseling is your service. You might want to specify the outcome or aspect of your service you want to find out about. Sorry, this is the generic one. The example follows in the next slide. What are you trying to find out? Why does it matter? What data answers your question? And what happens next? So that's what the form looks like. Okay, so here is the example. So the Disability Resource Center was interested in their test proctoring, and they wanted to find out, are students really using it? So why is that important? Well, it tells them whether students are advocating for themselves, which is one of the goals of the service. Students need to use these accommodations. They need to tell their instructors that they need accommodations. And so are they doing that, or are they just, trying to hope no one notices? So this is about the effectiveness of the resource center's ability to achieve one of its goals of self-advocacy. The method, they're going to survey the students, and they're going to also look at students who actually have come in for proctoring. And next steps, will depend on what they find. A check-in in the spring. Now, here we may turn around to the DRC folks, and who knows what they will discover or have discovered. But in the check-in, we would want to hear, again, what was the issue that they were addressing. A data summary. So if there was a survey, share the results of the survey. Or if you did tally the number of students who used the proctoring center, let's, write that down somewhere. If you had a discussion about it, tell us about which division meeting you discussed these issues at, or which department meeting, or just when you and your two colleagues got together and talked about it. But just a brief summary, but just something to document the discussion. Maybe there are minutes that you can link to, whatever's relevant. Is there any action you're going to take next? And then, is this issue done? So here, this is blank, but you could see, for instance, the Disability Resource Center might discover that students are not taking as many or using the accommodations as much as they should. And so the next step might be to find out why, or simply to remind students that they can, or to think about ways to publish their service, or to come to some arrangement with instructors to help instructors publicize the service. There'll be some outcome. And maybe, again, the issue will be closed, and maybe it won't. Maybe they'll find that students, they are using the center and they're advocating, and that's going fine. And so the status there would be the loop is closed, and next year we're going to do something else. So the summary, there's more of a purposeful assessment. The program review language is different. There's a new chronological structure. A couple of points you will have seen, and I didn't mention it, so I'll mention it now. First of all, we're distinguishing between learning outcomes and service area outcomes. I'll say more about that in a minute. And also, we used to ask faculty to talk about how their services supported institutional outcomes. We don't anymore. So that's not even in program review. And then finally, the assessment section is one component of the larger section. And then we have a new documentation process. Okay, so what are you going to confront when you go to do this year's program review? Well, first of all, the previous program review question, it's, tell us about the results of your previous program assessment, says program review. So one possible problem may be, you had a future program plan of action in fall 2016, but it wasn't really about assessment, or you've forgotten about it, or it's been sidetracked, or the data you collected doesn't really, answer the question you had. So if that's the case, just say so. That's fine. Share whatever data you have, share whatever plan you had, but, if it didn't work out, it's okay to say that. It's important to outline the plan you have going forward. That's very useful. Certainly, if the data you've collected does answer a question you have, or if you have a question which can be answered with the routine data you collect, then great, so not a problem. Bear in mind that one thing you might discuss in terms of previous assessment is that alignment activity from spring of 2018, where you were all thinking about which institutional learning outcome you are aligned with. Even though that is not required anymore, that can be a helpful way forward. I'll say more about the ILO thing in a minute. A second issue you may come across, and this should be familiar too from the spring, is that we didn't used to talk in terms of service area outcomes, only student learning. But actually, that's not always helpful. You know, what you want with an outcome is some concrete goal that you can measure your performance against. So if you want to know if your service is delivering what it's supposed to deliver, are we achieving this? If it's anything to do with student learning, then it's a learning outcome. So if you want to know whether your workshop on educational counseling and course selection was successful, then you will want to know students learned what you wanted them to learn. So that's a learning outcome. Students will know about center resources. That's a learning outcome. You want them to walk away with something in their mind. However, sometimes you want them to walk away having been able to do something. That is really more of a service area outcome. You know, if you're admissions and records, you probably want students, for instance, and this is invented, but it's a kind of thing you might have, to be able to complete all their registration online. That's nothing to do with the student's head. That's to do with something the student's able to do. So that's something you worked on in the spring, and that's something you can definitely discuss in program review, because that's a good way to talk about, in effect, continuous improvement. Now, the ILO alignment question is interesting. Just as we took that language out of program review, we had actually created an institutional learning outcome really with student services in mind. Because before spring of 2017, our institutional outcomes were general education outcomes. They spoke to the GE pattern. So it was effective communication, critical thinking, quantitative reasoning, social awareness and diversity, and ethical responsibility and effective citizenship, those 5. And of course, for a lot of student services, you know, especially when you're looking at service area outcomes, you're not really speaking to, that's not really what your service is for. You know, you want students, you certainly will have the effect of helping students think critically, but that's not why you have the financial aid workshop. You have the financial aid workshop so that students have more financial aid options and use them. So it doesn't really help you sort of place yourself on the map of students' college success. So we took a leaf out of the book of a lot of other colleges and we added an outcome, independent learning and development. And you can pause the button here for a minute and have a read of this. The goal then is for this outcome to encompass all those activities, learning activities, but also area outcomes, which help students, you know, work in college, have goals, use resources, advocate for themselves, things like that. So even though you no longer have to align yourself with an ILO, there is one just for you, and there's no reason why you shouldn't discuss it. Another issue may be you didn't have a particular research question. In that case, just analyze the data you've got with the outcomes you would find and see what you can make of it. But if you can't make anything of it, that's fine. You could reflect on the ILO alignment, and mostly you can have a good research question going forward. You won't have assessment plans, of course, because we've only just introduced them for this coming year. Data collection, I think for student services, I suspect your data resources are the same as they always were, because you tend to use surveys and use of services and other instruments, quizzes after workshops and so on. And you tend to be much more routine than instructional faculty. Do bear in mind that PRE is starting to give you more disaggregated data. That's obviously a work in progress. We haven't got that many data analysts, but that is something we can work on going forward. Finally, what about TrackDown? If it works for you and you like it and you use it, great. No reason why you shouldn't. However, if you would just as soon use the assessment plan model with a brief outline of what you're doing and keep your own records in Excel or what have you, as long as you upload one with a copy of the assessment plan, that's fine too. So TrackDown is optional. So I will be putting all this with assessment plan copies up on our website. I hope this is useful. If you have any more questions, feel free to shoot me an email. And in the meantime, happy program reviewing.